Ladies and gentlemen, it's that time once again for you to be encouraged, inspired, motivated, and most of all, loved. It's the woman that we all know and love, the show that has America buzzing.
You can make it with Miss Lady Tweet.
Hello, it is a wonderful Wednesday. It's Miss Lady Tweet and Daryl the Dice Guy.
What's going on, baby? How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am absolutely splendiferous.
Splendiferous. That's a new one.
Mhm.
Well, we are here, and our topic tonight is mental illness, which is something that we both can relate to and speak on.
Girl, you so crazy.
I'm crazy. You crazy.
Oh, well, I ain't know. You crazy. I'm not crazy.
All right.
You cray.
We'll see.
Mm-hmm. So what's going to happen today, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to really dig deep into the crazy life of Miss Lady Tweet, specifically the mental illnesses. And even though we are kind of laughing and making light of it, it is actually a very serious topic, and one that Miss Lady Tweet, and you'll agree, is not really talked about, especially in the Black community and especially in the church.
Absolutely not. And that's something I was getting ready to get to. But first, I'd like to thank you for joining me for yet a third show.
Yay.
Thank you so much for being a part of this and being with me in this process. I'm excited about our audience. I'm excited about the show expanding and new listeners. And I'm just excited for you being here with me.
Absolutely. And so wait. So like in the church, right? If you attend service 3 times, that makes you officially a member and you are officially a part of the thing, right?
I see where you're going with this.
Is that how that works, right? So the third time's a charm, right?
Yeah, third time's a charm. So you're officially a part of my show. And I'm just glad that you're here.
Wait, I'm sorry, wrong show.
He's a hot mess, but I'm glad that you're here. And we're tonight going to talk about mental illness and being aware and what it is in my life, and just digging a little bit deeper and letting the listeners know a little bit more about myself.
Okay, so now once again, you all are listening to You Can Make It with Miss Lady Tweet. If you're listening to this and you hear my voice, please share this with somebody. Please download this. Please make sure anybody that you know of that suffer from mental illness, whatever it might be, just, hey, let them know that there's a resource out there that they can go to, and that resource is Miss Lady Tweet.
Absolutely. I'm here to help in any way that I can. In fact, I have a website as well as a telephone number, and I want you to take that down. It's missladytweet.com, and the telephone number is 718-640-5957.
One more time.
718-640-5957.
Got it. I'm going to call you, girl.
Oh, Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So mental illness awareness and what it is in my life. So not too long ago, I was diagnosed bipolar, and I was diagnosed with multiple personality disorder. Those are the two major things that I want to talk about tonight, because it is not mentioned in the church at all, especially when dealing with mental illness. And I also suffer from PTSD. And that is something that is not mentioned at all, hardly in the Black community. Mm-hmm. And people think when they talk about PTSD that it's mainly with soldiers, but it's not. Anyone can suffer from PTSD. It's post-traumatic stress disorder, which means that you could have gone through something in your life that caused reaction, and you're stressing from it, and it causes your brain to react to that trauma in such a way that is distressing. Mm-hmm. And PTSD can come out in many forms. It can come out in your personality. It can come out in your attitude, your interactions with others, with your family. And even it has to do with isolation. Some people that suffer from PTSD, because of the trauma that they've gone through, they isolate themselves. Yes. So these are warning signs to look for when dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. And even in depression, a lot of these things are not mentioned in the church, in the Black community, in our homes. So I want to make people aware of those things that are happening and things that are going on with people that suffer from mental illness.
Okay. So, babe, I want to personally thank you. I being your husband and being someone that goes through and watches you go through mental illness. And of course, I'm saying that like I don't have my own issues. I also suffer from mental illness, not PTSD, but I do have different things that I suffer from and I deal with that don't help situation at best. But I'm thankful that you're willing to step out and talk about this. So, can you tell us and the listeners kind of, obviously the PTSD and all those things. Where did it all start, and how did it happen, and can you give us a kind of a brief of how it all started?
Well, at a young age, I was traumatized sexually, and it spilled over into my teenage years. I have been harassed and sexually assaulted in school at a young age, and I have been in situations where I didn't know how to necessarily handle them, and the PTSD came in with those sexual traumas. And then came the depression. I suffered from depression at an early age because of the sexual trauma and the abuse and the the neglect in some areas that I faced because I didn't really know how to speak out about it.
Okay. And as a teenager, you mentioned, so you were traumatized as a teenager or as a young girl and as a teenager, and that's really where the PTSD really started.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
And then not only did it spill over from childhood to my teenage years, it spilled over to my young adult years when I got into an abusive marriage.
Okay. Now, one thing that I do in my research, uh, you mentioned the multiple personality disorder.
Yes.
It's called something different now. So if you look it up, it's going to be a different word. I can't remember the phrase. Um, but one of the things that is mentioned, and we heard about a lot of times, is that when you suffered the trauma you did as a child, a lot of times that trauma is so severe and so intense that your brain can't handle it. So what it does is it isolates or it
Mm-hmm.
separates that trauma or that incident. Okay, dissociative identity disorder is the actual name of it. So that's the actual clinical term for what we commonly call multiple personality disorder. And basically what it does is say you were, like you said, you were sexually assaulted at a young age. You'll take that experience, whether it's a single incident or a long-term incident, and then you'll kind of compartmentalize it and kind of put it in the back of your brain and lock it away.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is, and even and just being transparent, what happens with you is you begin to look at that person as a different person, where it literally becomes a personality that you or a persona that a person can take on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is true.
So one of the things that I really admire about you is your persistence and your willingness to actually face um, these issues head on instead of, a lot of times people will run.
Absolutely. No, I'm going to face them head on and I'm going to deal with them head on because I believe that I can make it. And if I make it out of my situations, then people can make it out of theirs as well. And I'm a living witness that I've made it out of a lot. I've made it through a lot and I've experienced a lot. So I know that I can make it and I know that our listeners can make it. Baby, tell them what they're listening to.
They are listening. You can make it with Miss Lady Tweet.
Absolutely. And we are talking about mental illness awareness, and we are talking about the things that plague people that deal with mental illness. And I want to dig a little bit deeper into the depression side. I was diagnosed also with bipolar depression. Now, bipolar and depression, they can walk hand in hand, but I have both of them. So it doesn't help to have the multiple personality disorder or what you call dissociative identity disorder.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't help to have that and be bipolar because you can be at any end of the poles where you can be one minute everything is all right, peaches and sunshine, and the next minute everything is falling apart. So I thank God for doctors and for psychiatrists that can put you on the medications to stable you and to make you even out, so that your high highs and your low lows aren't that high and aren't that low. It kind of raises the floor and lowers the ceiling a little bit,
Okay.
with your moods. But one thing I do want to touch on is a lot of times in the Black community and in the church, we don't think it's okay to take medication. We don't think that it's okay to deal with counselors and psychiatrists, but they're here to help you. They're here to make sure that you're getting the proper treatment so that you can deal with these disorders and make them livable, and that you're not, everybody has that crazy uncle or that crazy aunt, but if they would have gotten help back in the day, they wouldn't have been so crazy.
Absolutely. Wait. You had a crazy uncle too.
Yes, I did.
Oh, girl, I got I got a couple of them actually. Them jokers, and I
And
hope they're listening.
a lot of times they're dealing with mental illness, but people just look at them like, oh, they're just being crazy. Oh, that's just their personality. But if they got help, they wouldn't be so crazy and off the wall.
Mm. Wait, so for all y'all listening, if that crazy uncle or that crazy auntie or whoever that is, yeah, you might want to go ahead and let them listen to this right here. So babe, one thing I wanted to ask you, and you know, talking about the church now. You grew up in the church.
Absolutely.
Your parents were well respected and known deacons and all that in the church. How did that play a part in your dealing with your mental illness, your depression, and your PTSD and all those things?
Well, it was hard to deal with. I knew something was wrong with me, but it wasn't until I got a little bit older to deal with the psychiatrist side of it. My parents, I will say they had me in counseling when I was a little bit older, about maybe 15 or 16. But when I was little and I was maybe 12 or 13, I knew something was wrong. I knew that it wasn't, I wasn't normal. But because these things aren't talked about in the church or even in the Black family, it was kind of swept under the rug and left alone, and it wasn't really addressed.
Okay, and to be more to the point, a lot of times, um, you know, we're in ministry. I preach and we sing and we minister all over. So a lot of times when you're in the church, they'll say, "Well, just pray, just go get prayer, pray about it, fast about it, seek God." All
And
those things.
and that's true. You can fast and pray and seek God, but God gives us wisdom. And if you need medication, you need to take that medication until your deliverance comes. And sometimes your deliverance might be the medication. It might be that you need to be on, medicated for the rest of your life. And that's okay as long as you're being stabled out. And God does hear and answer prayer. And when He decides to deliver and heal you, He will bring deliverance and healing. But until then, He gave the doctors the knowledge and the wisdom that is needed in order to heal us and to make us normal and make us as stable as possible.
And to reiterate, like for me, I'm a 90% disabled veteran. And as such, people that see me, they wouldn't even believe the amount of medicines that I have to take. I'll suffer from with sleep apnea, so I use a CPAP machine at night. And if I don't use those things, if I don't take the medicines every day, if I don't use the machine every night, it will eventually affect my well-being and affect my livelihood. So, and I'm a preacher and I'm a teacher and I do all these things in the church and for God, but at the same time, this body that I'm attached to is flawed in several ways. So, we have to get to the understanding that if I suffer from mental illness, if I suffer from any kind of illness or injury that requires medical treatment and care, get the treatment, get the care. Let somebody look after you because ultimately that could be the difference between life and death or even success or failure in your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So now, baby, I want you to. You talked about, I want to kind of go back really quickly, and this is really key. The multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. Can you kind of tell us? Do you really even understand or know how does it work for you? How does that experience work for you?
Well, for me, I don't necessarily always recognize it when it's there, when it happens. I've had people tell me, you shifted on me. You changed, your personality changed a little bit. You were happy and now you're sad, or one moment you were this way and now you're the next way. And so I had to actually sit down with a counselor and with you, and then he diagnosed me with that. He had to actually say, well, what he had a question, what happens when she's shifts into these different personalities, what happens to make her be this way, and what happens when she does shift. And that's when they asked, my husband, for those of you that are listening, they asked my husband these questions, and then they were able to say, oh, well, she suffers from this personality disorder due to her trauma. She takes on these personas to protect herself.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not something that I noticed that I did, because it's a disorder. It's part of my disability.
Yes. So with that being said, I'm actually not going to talk about the actual personalities in this show. We're going to talk about them in another show. Um, what I will say, and what I will let everybody know, is that we are currently in treatment, and Miss Lacey is currently in treatment for this. So that's not something that I really want to go into, because we're still in the process of getting her the healing and the help that she needs on that behalf. But I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, when I'm able to talk about it, it's going to be a story, because I will actually be able to introduce you to several different people who are all Miss Lady Tweed.
And that, as crazy as that sounds, I'm excited about my healing and my process. And I'm sharing this with you to let you know that we all have processes and we all have healing that needs to take place. And mental illness is a real thing. It's something that people face every single day, but it's how you face it that makes it worth the while. It's if you're willing to take the treatment, if you're willing to get the help that you need in order to progress, is what matters the most. And if I can make it through this, I'm going to keep you posted on my journey. If I can make it through this, you can make it through whatever you're going through. And I thank God for the deliverances that he's already had me come through and be healed from, and progress. So, along this journey, there are many obstacles. There are many days that, sometimes my illness, it gets the best of me. And sometimes I'm able to defeat the enemy. And so I just thank God for that, because it's a constant battle, but it's not an uphill battle. It's something that is, I thank God for his strength, and we're able to make it through. And, one thing about the depression, the bipolar depression, if you manage it well, if you take your meds, you can overcome. And I thank God for that. I thank God that he placed psychiatrists and doctors and different things in my life in order to press through, because for many years I wasn't taking the medication, and I didn't realize how high my highs were and how low my lows were, until I woke up one day and I would spend so much money, and I would look at my bank account, and I felt like I was Superwoman. I would look at my bank account and it would be empty because I had a high, and I went and tried to save the world and spend money on everybody and their mother, and didn't pay bills at home, and didn't take care of what I was supposed to. That's what bipolar disorder does to you. And then you have low lows where you feel like, it's the end of the world. You're helpless, you're hopeless, and you just want to stay in bed all day and not, be bothered by anybody. So the medication kind of, like I said before, it raises the floor and lowers the ceiling to where I don't have the high highs where I'm doing erratic, things and making random choices to be Superwoman, nor am I so low where I can't function.
Okay. So, babe, on that note, I want to talk about, obviously, we've talked about your little trip to California, and we talked about a lot of the other things. I know one of the side effects of PTSD and trauma, especially sexual trauma, is you become really sexually active or sexually promiscuous.
Mm-hmm.
Even as a young child or as a person, and it kind of grows with you as you go through life. So, can you kind of talk about that aspect and how that kind of tied in even to your stint in California, if you will?
Well, the trauma that I went through, the PTSD that I dealt with after the assaults and everything, it kind of made me it put me in a low place, but it also made me become very promiscuous because I started to want acceptance from different men or different people, not necessarily men, but want acceptance of myself. I felt so low. I felt the only way to be accepted was to be promiscuous. And then in my stint in California, the PTSD didn't really help, but it helped me in my endeavors to be whatever I was needed to be at that time. And so I was going through the trauma all over again in my mind and protecting myself. So not only did the PTSD play a part, but the multiple personalities played a part because I had to take on certain roles in order to get the different jobs done that I was doing at
Mhm.
the time. So in dealing with that trauma, before I even made it to California, before I even graduated high school, I began to have phone sex with people and, deal with different people over the internet. I remember going in chat rooms online and talking sexually to people, as a way of escape.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Um, so when did you actually become sexually active on your own accord? Obviously, what happened to you prior to that wasn't, we don't count that. So when did you actually start becoming sexually active and how did that play a part in your life?
I became sexually active as a teenager in high school. Um, my senior year, I was dealing with a guy, um, and I remember being sexually active with him. He was in the military. He was going away to the military, and um, it was just during that time when we were having phone sex. We were making out in the library, and oral sex is sex. So that
Hmm.
is a form of
Yeah,
sex.
you touching the spots,
Right. It
that kind of
wasn't
get.
it wasn't penetration, but it was a form of sex. So that's those were my earliest experiences with that.
Okay. So so you were kind of, trying to feel your way out, trying to figure out all those things. Now, you mentioned California, you mentioned the multiple personalities and having to kind of take on a persona in order for you to deal with and be able to perform the task that your pimp and the guys that you were forced to be with had you do.
Hmm.
One thing that I can say, there is actually, you do actually have a persona, one of your personalities, if you will, that is a very sexual and very promiscuous and very that whole say your whole California experience, that whole sexual experience, you actually do have a other, if you will, or a personality that sometimes portrays itself in that manner. So I just wanted to just kind of verify
Okay.
what you're saying. So what you're saying is actually correct. You take on those things, you kind of block it out in your mind and kind of go to another place, and that persona, quote unquote, then takes over because it's really, if you think about what you're really doing, it could probably send you crazy, literally.
Wow. Yes, that's true. So, and even, on that note, a lot of drugs and alcohol take a part in that too. Dealing with PTSD, I did become a drinker and I did become a smoker and I did become a pill popper,
Mm,
to cope. So, that is one of the coping mechanisms that a lot of people that suffer from that mental illness, they have. If you see a lot of soldiers now, they're homeless and strung out on drugs because they're dealing with the PTSD and the mental anguish. They're trying to cope. So instead of getting the proper medication, a lot of people self-medicate in order
hmm.
to deal with it.
Well, I self-medicate too. I like some lemonade and some barbecue
We're
ribs.
not talking about the food portion, but yes, the
Oh,
overeating can be a way of self-medicating.
okay. So, final thing about this, and I kind of, this is kind of the culmination or the climax, if you will. Tell me about Tweet.
Well, I was told she is the gatekeeper. That personality, she's the go-getter. She's the one that gets it done. She's the one that protects the others. She's the
Hmm.
one that, if you ever want to speak to me and you need something done, you need to, I was always the one to get it done. You can count on me. And that's that side of me that I call Tweet, that is
The
accountable.
hood.
She's the hood chick. She's the one that
Mhm.
gets it done.
Now, mind you, for ladies and gentlemen, for those of you listening, if you don't know her story, um, Teresa was a pretty princess. She was, her parents were well off, and she had everything she wanted. She got, I mean, literally everything she wanted, she got. She was the only child. She was
For
that,
8 years.
yeah, for 8 years. Yes, yeah. But even with that, she was like the pretty princess. She got everything she wanted. The privilege. She's like the Huxtables before they had any other kids. It's kind of, I put it like that. She was like the oldest Huxtable child before they had any kids. That's kind of how her life was. So she had, I mean, and obviously that kind of does bring another point. Just because somebody has influence and money and stuff does not mean they're not suffering through anything. Does not mean that they're not going through anything, because you never know what somebody is going through or
Absolutely.
has gone through. Because obviously, my wife had everything you could. She had loving parents. She had a loving family. She had all the parents had money. They had everything that you would want to have. Yet she still went through what she went through, and she dealt with what she dealt with. Um, so yeah, so Tweet is the gatekeeper.
She's the
So
gatekeeper.
even though Teresa, now Teresa, you did have a stint where you were kind of in the hood and kind of in that lifestyle, didn't you? Did you have a
Yes, I did. I had gone through some things, and I left my parents' home when I met my ex-husband. They kind of saw through him, and they kind of could tell that he would be abusive, but I didn't want to hear it. So I left their home and I moved into the hood with my best friend and her family. So it was kind of a hood situation. I had to deal with the ghetto lifestyle and deal with roaches and deal with all kinds of things. So I did
Mhm.
have a hood stint, and then I
The
did.
ghetto?
And then I also had another stint in the hood, with some family members I stayed with for a little period of time.
Mhm.
So I do know the lifestyle. I do know eating oodles and noodles and sitting on crates.
Mhm. And then of course, I'm not gonna go into it deep, but as she, even up into recent times, a lot of her dealings and a lot of things that she did, especially with her trips to Philadelphia, you really gotta become hood, you really gotta be streetwise to do some of the things that she was involved in. And there was silence in heaven.
Yes, you do have to take on those personalities and dealing with certain people. Um, and I had to do that. I had to, going in certain places, going to certain clubs, not really taking my medication seriously, not really dealing with my bipolar disorder, taking on different personas to get certain jobs done and deal with certain people in the clubs. Definitely did not, it wasn't good for me. It did not help my treatment. But it was something that I did do, and you are correct. You have to take on certain, when you go to certain neighborhoods, you got to take on
Uh-huh.
certain personalities.
Yes. And I'm gonna go ahead and kind of interject myself right here. Um, the diagnosis that I was given is actually other personality disorder. I know it sounds like it's not a real thing, but it actually is a real thing. What happens with me is it's just that I take on the personality and the persona of whatever it is that I'm willing and wanting to do. Basically, it's like being on stage. You're an actor and you take on a certain role. Well, what happens with me is I'll take on that role and I will embody it so much that it becomes a part of my life. If I want to be if I want to be a football player, then I'm going to take on. If I want to be a judge, if I want to be a doctor, if I want to be a singer, if I want to be a whatever it is I want to be, if I want to be, and it took me down some really dark and really horrific paths. There was a moment in my life where I considered myself a dom. And for those of you who don't know what that is, that's basically if you've seen The movie 50 Shades of Grey, yeah, that was the lifestyle that I was living for a period of my life because I thought I was and I thought I wanted to be, and I became that. Um, Obviously, that is not something that is recommended, nor is it something that's healthy. But again, that is a part of my diagnosis and a part of what I deal with personally. But I digress. This is not my show. This is Miss Lady Tweet's show. And this is You Can Make It with Miss Lady Tweet, not with Daryl the Dice Guy. So back to you, baby. So you wanted to end the show. We're going to go ahead and we're wrapping up right now. And I wanted to kind of talk about what the final straw was for you to get help and how that's been going so far.
Well, I can say that my final straw was last year when I went to the hospital voluntarily. For the first time, it was voluntarily, because I knew that God had a purpose and a plan for my life, and I knew
Mhm.
that Daryl was part of that purpose and part of that plan. And if I wanted to have a healthy relationship with him, I had to be healthy and I had to start getting on the right path. So last April, I checked myself into a hospital and I sought after help, and I got on my medications and stayed on my medications. Now that's not to say that the devil doesn't try me and that my mental illnesses don't try to rear their heads, because they do, and I deal with them every day, and that's why I'm still seeking help and getting more help than I've gotten before. But I knew that I needed it. I knew that I needed it, and I knew that I needed to pursue it quickly. So
Mhm.
at that point, I knew my relationship relied on it last year. So that was one thing that I wanted to make sure. And not only just for my relationship, but for my relationship with my child. I want to continue to have a healthy relationship with my family, my child, and I don't want to be all over the place, if
Mhm.
you will.
Absolutely.
So, getting the help that I need. And I just want to encourage someone, if you know anyone, if you think that you suffer from mental illness, if you have a family member or anyone that you know, please reach out and get the help that you need, because, I'm not just sitting here telling my story on this wonderful Wednesday just to be telling it. I'm telling it to let you know that you can make it, you can overcome, you can be healed, you can be delivered. There is help out there for you. Just have to reach for it and talk about it. If you're a youth leader, if you're a director, if you're someone that deals in the church, bring it up in your church meetings, bring it up in your next women's meeting. Let's talk about this thing and let's make it happen. And I just want to thank you, the listener, for being part of You Can Make It with Miss Lady Tweet. It's not the end, it's only the beginning, and whatever you put your mind to, you can do.
Well, I was going to ask you, babe, what your final thoughts were, but I guess you went ahead and told us what your
Those are
final.
my final thoughts.
But I will say this. Can you tell us how to get a hold of you, and what are some of the resources that you might be able to recommend people to go to if they need help?
Well, one of them is the hospital. Every hospital has a section that deals with mental illness and psychiatry, and also there's NAMI. It's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They are national. You can look them up. It's NAMI. Also, how you can get a hold of me is on my website, missladytweet.com. That's missladytweet.com. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Miss Lady Tweet. For NAMI. And there also is a national prevention for suicide, and that telephone number is 800-273-8255. This is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. It's 800-273-8255. So again, you can get a hold of me on missladytweet.com. And this has been You Can Make It with Miss Lady Tweet. I want to encourage you to follow me every Wednesday. Listen in, and we have some good things in store for you.
Absolutely, baby.
Yes.
I love you.
I love you.
Even though you're crazy as all in the world.
You're crazy.
Mhm. Good night, everybody.
Have a wonderful Wednesday.
Gospel Says.